Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for tuning in to the latest edition of Cota Access. For those of you who may be new to the Cota Access webinar series, what we try to do here is we try to bring you dynamic, market-focused conversations with visionary thought leaders, and we explore market technology trends that fundamentally impact the world that we live in. So I'm Eric Lee. I'm a principal here at Cota Capital, and I'm delighted to have with us today Eden Full Goh, who is the founder and CEO of Mobot. And so today, we're going to discuss how AI-driven mechanical robots and physical AI agents transform how enterprises monitor and protect their mobile-first customer experiences. And so I know, and I can guarantee for a fact that everyone listening today engages with mobile apps on a very daily basis. And so we're going to examine how the mobile and hardware landscape has significantly evolved in the last few years, and it's left many enterprises scrambling to ensure that their architectures are scalable and that they're able to deliver new mobile experiences. And so before we dive in, I'd love for you guys to get to know Eden, her background, and her founder story. So with that, Eden, could you please just take a few minutes and just describe what inspired you to start Mobot? What was that aha moment that solidified your idea and pushed you to take action?
Thanks, Eric. Hey, everyone. It's very nice to be on this webinar, and thank you for this opportunity. My name is Eden. I'm the founder and CEO here at Mobot. And we're a company based in New York where we have infrastructure as a service where we build and operate our own mechanical robots to help our customers, many of which are enterprises, to be thinking about and protecting their customer experiences, especially the mobile first and mobile centric ones. I was inspired to start the company because I actually started my career working as a product manager, more than a decade ago. And I started my career working at Palantir and working on different web apps for government and healthcare insurance and energy clients. And, a decade plus ago, the world was very web app focused. Software engineers were really building best practices around continuous deployment and continuous integration and delivery. There were best practices that were popping up on how to test more often, if testing and quality should be part of engineering or part of product. And so there were a lot of interesting conversations that were really swirling. And so I got to really kind of be at the forefront of that and see how that was developing while I was working at Palantir and kind of like working alongside best-in-class engineers. But then I moved into a product management role at a medical device company, and they were building a portable ultrasound probe, very similar to Vave, which is also a Cota portfolio company. The company that I worked at was called Butterfly Network. And fundamentally, instead of just like a cookie cutter vanilla web app that you just open up your laptop and use, all of a sudden, I, as a product manager, had to deal with all these phones and tablets. And because it was a portable ultrasound device, the kinds of product users that I was interviewing, it was very different. Doctors might have their own personal iPhone or Android phone that they would bring to the hospital. They might have a hospital provisioned and mobile device managed like MDM managed device that has all these restrictions and settings set on it. They might be running in and out of a hospital stairwell and the internet connection is inconsistent while they're trying to upload images to the cloud. And this kind of like real world, very tangible example of the complexity of product development was kind of what kind of jolted me into realizing, oh, wow, this is really different than the perfect cookie cutter web world that I used to operate in. And the more research I did in terms of tools that could support physical products that integrate with software, the more that I researched into mobile-centric products in operating in the physical world, I didn't really see a lot of automation solutions or just tools that could really help support engineers and product managers and growth teams in this kind of new world where everything is just way more complicated. You don't just assume you're sitting at your laptop and you have stable Wi-Fi. It could be very inconsistent. Certain events might occur and trigger based on where you are. And so that was what inspired me to start Mobot. Was I had to wrangle with all these complex scenarios. I had to literally turn on the airplane mode and try to run the same test, make sure the feature was working that the engineering team just shipped. And this process of manual testing, where our engineers told me, sorry, Eden, there's no way to simulate or the perfect scenario that represents this real world use case. The best way to test it or to check that it works is just to use it as in the real world. And that ultimately was what inspired me to start Mobot, because I had to do all this manual testing and our team would take turns. And I'm going to share a little video now that will just kind of show what we do at Mobot. But that was what sparked the idea for the company, because I thought to myself, what if we had a fleet of robots that we could just rent in the cloud? When I was working at the time, I didn't want to have a bunch of robots in my office. That was too complicated. But if I could tell a robot fleet in the cloud exactly what I needed executed, that would accomplish everything that I need from a regulatory perspective, documentation perspective. And so what Mobot does is we have that robot fleet, we have hundreds of devices, and we have AI agents that we use to control these robots. Where, for example, you can see on screen, we have an AI agent that is controlling an iPhone and an Android device. And it's able to navigate around inside an application. It can background the app. It can be sitting on the home screen. We have one phone right now that we've instructed the AI agent to send a text message to the other AI agent on the other phone. And so now the robot is going to compose a message. It's going to interpret the elements on the screen using computer vision. It's going to determine, okay, what am I going to tap next? After I take a look at the screen, I'm analyzing the text, I'm analyzing the semantic context, I'm analyzing the icons, and I'm going to then take action exactly the way that a human would. And so now you can see the robot has sent a message, and it's actually going to interact on the other phone where it received a push notification. And so these are the kinds of scenarios that I'm talking about that are just more complicated. It's dependent on time. It's dependent on a prerequisite. It might be dependent on a specific device setting. And we want to verify that, like, inside of the app and outside of the app, that it is possible to accomplish this customer workflow from end to end. And so now you can see the robot has read the message from the other agent. It's going to come up with a reply that's contextually relevant, and then it's going to reply back to the other robot on the other device. And so that's just an example of a very simple workflow where we're able to use these real mechanical robots and combine it with AI to automate these workflows that are very human-like, that are very realistic, that happen in the physical world, that just using traditional software testing frameworks, you're unable to achieve this level of fidelity of testing and reliability of testing.
That's amazing. Well, Eden, thank you very much for walking us through that and that AI agent. And so it's pretty amazing what you guys have built thus far. And just for our audience, we also have a great series called Founder in Five. And Eden and Cota's co-founder and founder and managing partner, Bobby Asdani, they have a great conversation about Mobot. So I recommend you check that out if you have time after this. So one of the first topics that I'd love to better understand is, Cota, we're always just trying to understand the existing problem. And I think all great businesses, they stem from an urgent problem, frankly, that companies cannot solve on their own. And I think you've outlined some great examples at your own experience at Palantir and at Butterfly Network. But, why do you think organizations should prioritize quality monitoring and insights for their mobile experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in the last 3 to 5 years, the way that mobile products and the way that consumers use software has really evolved. Historically, it would be possible to kind of just like open the app, use the app, and then close it. And that was basically it. You wouldn't think about it outside of just kind of reading and consuming the information. And I think what we've seen is that existing tools on the market, whether it's a software testing framework or other vendors with device farms, this kind of world of simpler test cases or user journeys was really easy for engineering teams to kind of build automation and build development processes around. But what's really ultimately kind of evolved in the last 3 to 5 years, and this is a term that we actually coined at Mobot ourselves, but we've sort of separate things into two different buckets. There's intra-app use cases and there's inter-app use cases. And so the way we see it is intra-app is kind of those simpler use cases I was talking about, where you open the app and everything that you're doing and interacting with inside that product is kind of relating to itself and relating all to features that that company controls. So I'm sharing a slide right now and just kind of using Evernote as an example. Creating a note inside the Evernote app, editing the note inside the Evernote app. These are all things that you could automate using traditional software automation. But the complexity is that as we move into a world where users might expect, oh, your notes need to sync even when the app is backgrounded, or someone else sent you a note and they're sharing it and they have a different version of Evernote, or they're on Android and you're on iOS, or there's a different complexity of other test cases that involve a third-party SDK or API. That's kind of where the world is now getting more complicated. And so we're calling this bucket of workflows inter-app. And the thesis here at Mobot is we think that these inter-app workflows are more and more important, and they're going to overtake the complexity of intra-app in the near future, if it hasn't already happened for a lot of these products. And so using Expedia as an example, Expedia aggregates a lot of data about different flights. So it has to get the price data from United. It has to get the availability of the flight if it's going to aggregate a price that you're going to have a deal that's not available on the actual airfare website. It has to aggregate all of that information and present it to the user correctly in real time, even as that changes. It might present different options based on available hotels. If your Google Maps location is in a different place, or if you had the setting disabled where it was like, do not track my settings or do not show where my location is, the behavior of the app has to be different in all those different scenarios. And that's controlled by the phone, that's controlled by the user, that is not controlled by Expedia. And so there's also promotional campaigns that could be run. You might be outside of the app and you might get a push notification saying, oh, Expedia has a promotion going on right now, $50 off flights to Miami. And the user's going to click on it, and you have to make sure that the attribution of that marketing link is correct, that it remembers that this user got to this page in the mobile app because it clicked on this push notification or this email link that it got from a campaign, or it was an SMS alert. And so in this world where things are super complicated, and also if we think about any workflows that might involve cameras, accessibility, submitting payments, Apple Pay, Google Wallet, things like that, multi-factor authentication. We just live in this world where there's more and more inter-app use cases. And when more things are outside of your control, it will be harder for an engineering team or a product team to really like perfectly script and automate things in a predictable way, especially because that team, that other team, that third-party API that your product talks to, they are making changes while you're making changes. And if everybody's constantly making changes, and Apple is making changes, and Google is making changes to iOS and Android, and Samsung just rolled out a new version of a phone, and there's a new Xiaomi or Oppo phone coming out. There's just this complexity in the world that is just a lot easier to get a mechanical robot to poke the phone than it is to try and have these perfect tests simulating it inside a virtualized environment. And so our whole thesis is the real world, and we should be representing these end user use cases exactly like how a human would be using the product. But I do think that like part of it is also just the ease of managing the complexity, where instead of having to build the script and everything, it will save time and be more efficient, especially with how flexible and agile these AI agents are. And just like you saw in the demo.
No, that's pretty amazing. And you can imagine as you get to more inter-app use cases, just the level of different permutations, combinations. I mean, clearly it doesn't grow linearly. And so just the sheer number of different permutations that you can have, I mean, just no one, call it QA tester manually can do it themselves. So your solution definitely makes a lot of sense. So that's amazing. And so one of the second things I want to segue into now is, okay, so we understand the use case or we understand the problem, and it's pretty apparent. So now we want to understand, okay, well, what are the measurable business outcomes or KPIs that a company may experience once they implement a solution, such as Mobot? And so are there, walk me through or walk us through the ROI perspective, and what are the tangible benefits that customers can typically observe?
Yeah. Especially with a lot of these inter-app workflows, I think sometimes there can be, some things as small as just an everyday feature, like going back to the Expedia example. You're pulling up the map and you want to make sure that in the Expedia mobile app it reflects nearby hotels. And so, kind of like, of course, step one is making sure the map displays correctly in your correct location, with all the nearby hotels that are actually available, and now that data is up to date. But I think this is where, once Mobot sort of helps a team to ensure that level of stability, the goal here is that would theoretically drive more bookings of hotels. And I think also making sure that that reflects correctly in the analytics. That's going to drive better analytics tracking, better attribution, so you can know that, okay, all of these users are trying to book hotels based literally on their physical location, as opposed to they are booking, several weeks out because they're planning for a trip in the future. And so basically our goal is that if we can help to protect the customer experience, it's going to result in organizations being able to make better decisions about their users, without having to sort of second guess a lot of the analytics. And a common pattern that we've sometimes seen with some web apps is that, oh, well, I'm just going to wait for the analytics to drop to 0%. Then I know something's wrong and I need to fix it. And everything's going to get fixed so fast that it doesn't matter. And I think that's sort of an outdated way that some teams may think about how to interact with their product analytics to make product decisions. On mobile, that's much harder because the Apple Store, Apple App Store, and Google Play, you do have to go through a review process, which can sometimes be very fast if you're lucky. It could take you less than 2 hours to get a new version of your app approved. But there are also other times where it might take several days for your app to get approved by Apple or Google, and then you're playing by their rules. So we've had instances where customers had to sort of comply with Apple's restrictions, or, oh, you forgot to include a link to your privacy policy page, and that would take several days to remediate. And so that slows down your product and growth team's ability to pivot, to be agile in response to your customer experience, or if you learn something insightful. And so the stakes are higher, which is why it's important to get it right, because you're not going to be able to just change it later. And I think in this world where not everything is open source, and there's going to be more operating systems that are coming out, more app stores, more ecosystems that you have to play with, whether it's Samsung has an app store, Amazon has an app store, Meta has an app store for their virtual reality apps. Everyone is going to have their own ecosystem. You have to play by those rules. You have to make sure everything works in the real world by all those rules. And so I think the business consequences matter, but I also think like being able to make these decisions quickly stems from having a reliable customer experience and having reliable data, and having a physical validation process on the real hardware. There's nothing that can beat that. I think it's all about making it accessible and making sure that every team has the resources to be able to pursue the solution that they need.
Yeah, now having that third party validation, I think makes a ton of sense. And one of the things that we're also, you're based in New York, we are based in Silicon Valley, and so of course we can't have a conversation without discussing AI. And I know you've already described a little bit about how you're using agentic AI in terms of your own product and how you're weaving it into Mobot. So when you think about it and you step back, and you think about how AI is transforming quality assurance practices in the mobile application industry as a whole, what are some of the key trends that you're really keeping an eye on to make sure that, you're not missing anything and you're staying ahead, frankly, of the competition?
Yeah. Mobot applies AI in different ways at our company, but I think what we're also trying to do is make sure we ride the tailwinds of the industry and also making sure that we're contributing back to the industry as well and sharing best practices with customers, with partners, and with fellow portfolio companies. And the way that we apply AI is along different parts of what I like to think of as the robot decision making process, which is similar to how a human might interact with something, a physical product. So, as a human, you're presented with a screen right now, or it could be in the future any interface. But right now, a lot of touch screens, since that's the world that we live in, is there's a UI and you have to read some text or you have to decide kind of the semantic context, and then you have to take some action. Normally, before you even get to this point, there are some instructions that you're generally given on what you are supposed to do. The robot is given a test plan. The customer has provided some instructions on what they want the robot to do, or you as a human already know what your intentions are going into this. And so we're able to leverage off-the-shelf large language models to kind of like help with the conversion process of the intention to a robot action. So like this is what I've been told to do as a robot. How do I map that to these are the buttons on the screen? This is the text on the screen. So this, based on that, and you kind of saw that during the demo, the robot is going to interpret and respond to what it sees. And so we're able to use large language models to help with the translation and interpretation and then kind of like mapping to what the action should be. But then what we have seen is once you get to the part where the robot actually needs to take an action, this is the part where Mobot had to actually develop our own action model and tooling. You may have seen a lot of industry announcements right now about operator agents that are capable of booking flights for you or automating web applications and desktop applications. There's a lot of training data for agents in using web apps, and there's a UX paradigm that's very well known. And again, part of it is because it's open source and it's been around for 20 something years. We have seen that some of the action models around mobile-centric or sort of more touchscreen or unusual interfaces, there's not as much training data for that. So those action models or agents are just not quite there yet. So they have trouble navigating mobile screens, just like having to scroll if you don't see something. It's more vertical. The orientation of everything is just slightly different. And so we've seen that like there needs to be a little bit of work there in the industry. And in the meantime, Mobot is developing our own tools internally to support that use case so that the robot knows what action to take once it's presented with the screen in the context of a mobile device.
Mhm.
After that piece, there's okay, you've taken the action, and now you need to decide as a robot, did I take the right action? And can I go forward with the rest of my process or the instructions I've been given? And so that assessment and interpretation of the results, we have our own convolutional neural network that we've trained on different images in order to determine kind of like, is this the correct step? And then also mapping it back to the semantic context of the original instruction. And so basically, long story short, is there are pieces, and I think this is the same for a lot of AI companies out there. There's pieces that you can leverage and kind of ride the tailwinds of the industry. But the honest truth is that in your specific niche or your solution in the industry, the off-the-shelf AI is probably not going to work out of the box. Teams have to build the context, the semantic context that's right for them. They might have to design certain prompts. Prompt engineering is extremely important. They might have to customize the model. They might have to provide their own training data. They might still have to fall back on traditional neural network, machine learning based models. There's no sort of like perfect AI solution for everybody. And so I think this is why I'm still very optimistic and hopeful that startups are not all rendered useless because AI is coming. We are, as a startup or as a technology company, like we understand kind of the use case, the application the best, and sort of like the nuance of, for example, of intra app versus inter app. That's something that's pretty Mobot specific and pretty specific to customer experiences in a mobile centric context. And so I think that's extremely important when thinking about how to apply AI is it has to be in that specific scenario in that industry, and it's not one size fits all.
Yeah, no, got it. That makes a lot of sense. And so, I guess one of the things that I think about is, I mean, do you ever worry or ever concerned about the over reliance on AI in testing? Could it lead to potential blind spots or missed bugs that, may just require a bit of human intuition? And how do you think about that?
Yeah, this is why Mobot takes a hybrid approach. So, our solution is not 100% AI. We have AI elements all the way sprinkled throughout our data pipeline and the execution pipeline, as I was outlining. But we also have spot checking, we have human verification all the way through. We have account managers that are staffed on our customers' accounts to ensure that we truly understand the context of what our customers are looking for. Because you're right, like the nuance of how you would test a travel application versus a fintech bank application, that's going to be different. And Mobot works with a number of different enterprises, and they all have slightly different requirements. Are you working with an engineering team that's using Mobot? Or are you working with a marketing team that's using Mobot? Because Mobot can be used throughout the enterprise. And we've seen that like that context really matters. And so it isn't something that you can 100% rely on AI for. You're also there needs to be a strategy and a pipeline for retraining, for providing new data and new contexts because the world is evolving so fast. For the same premise of why inter app monitoring is required as well, is because the world around you is changing fast. And so I think it's very important that like you don't rely on a model that was trained like 6 months ago. You have to keep up to date. You have to know the benefits of what are you able to get, the strengths of that particular model, but you should also know the weaknesses.
Right. And maybe the last topic that I'd love to discuss. And so, we live in the today and now. But at Coda, as VCs, we're always just trying to understand what's around the corner. And so we are trying to understand, okay, what are the future problems? What are the future solutions and technologies that will be able to solve those problems? And so as you think about the quality monitoring and insight mobile industry evolving over the next few years, how do you see that taking shape? I know you've talked about intra versus inter app, but what else are you keeping an eye on as you think about building your solution, building your problem to really, or building your product to really tackle these future problems over the coming years?
Yeah. I think that mobile as a whole is going to get redefined. It's already starting because you have a phone, but you also have a smartwatch. You have connected devices. You have Bluetooth peripherals. We have AR VR headsets. We have Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. And that's, we already kind of see mobile as a springboard to the physical world, the real world where consumers, end users are using software manifested physically. So in this world of AI where there's more AI things that do things for you on the web or in desktop, that's why I think it's important that we're also thinking about how do things get done in the real physical world. And so that's why robotics is important for it to play a role. And the way that I see technology evolving is that software is becoming more physical because all the obvious low-hanging fruit that's handled by traditional software, it's all going to be eaten up and just taken care of. And so when I see the evolution of our industry and also the solution that we're building at Mobot, we want to figure out how to support these new cutting edge form factors where right now it's still one screen, but it's a screen that talks to all these other devices. I think in the future, it might just be those other devices without the screen. And so how do we make sure that engineering teams are resourced and prepared for that? It is going to require slightly different development best practices, the way that people should submit code and manage releases and submit submissions to the App Store. There might be more than two App Stores, right? There's several different App Stores, different companies. And I think part of the complexity here is that with how accessible it is for companies to build their own ecosystems, build their own app stores, I think there's going to be more fragmentation and less of the monopoly duopoly that we currently see. And it might still be a monopoly and duopoly, but it's different companies. And engineering teams and growth teams and product teams are going to constantly have to respond and evolve to that. And I think kind of like putting all your eggs in the software basket, writing code for one particular system, that's going to get harder and harder to do. And I think it's important to really evolve the company, the enterprise, to be responsive to that, especially as these consumer patterns are changing.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that thoughtful response. And so, as we end here, maybe just for the audience, I'd love to take it back to where we started, and really just understand, what is one piece of advice that you received as a founder that has stuck with you?
I think I've spoken to a lot of founders. Many of them are Cota portfolio company fellow founders as well that are farther ahead than me. That are, if they've seen this, they've raised several rounds of funding and are wildly successful. I think a lot of the founders kind of tell me that it doesn't get easier or it's always a challenge. And the whole point, though, is that we're always learning and growing. The company is always learning and growing, and you're stepping into new challenges. I think that's an important point because when I started the company, there was a piece of this where I thought, okay, I'm going to just figure it out and figure out the playbook. And then the rest of the company just is going to scale the same way. Same sales process, same marketing process, how we build the engineering team, that's all going to be the same, right? And I think I've realized like you identify the patterns, you learn the patterns, you learn to pattern match, but then there's a new set of problems that will crop up. And that could be, surviving a pandemic. That could be surviving geopolitical changes and macroeconomic trends and industry changes. If Apple and Google make changes, I think being able to build the skill of being resilient as a company and as a founder, like that culture comes from the top. And I think me being hungry and open to that and knowing that it's always going to keep changing and that's like the fun part, I think that's what keeps me energized. So I want to wake up and keep doing this every single day.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you so much, Eden, and thank you so much for our audience for tuning in here. I know I learned a lot, so we hope you did too. And we thank everybody for the time, and we encourage you to tune in to the next Code Access webinar series. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Eden, and have a great
Thank
rest of
you.
the evening.